Welcome back to another edition of the Fatboyz Dynasty podcast, hosted by the Fantasyholics Podcast Network. Once again, we are live on YouTube again this week. Hopefully, the technical difficulties and the background noise from last week are fixed this week. We did some a little bit of cleaning up on our ends to get some better podcast out to you guys this week. So last week we kind of spent talking about, or the last 2 weeks kind of spent working through, some dynasty buys and some dynasty sells, some people we were fading, things like that. And then, Brant and I, we sat down and we talked, and we've got about a month from now until the NFL free agency opens. So we thought, what better way than this week to play the carousel game, if you will, talk about some guys that we want to see, where we want to see them go for good fantasy values and where we think they'll go. And then the next couple of weeks, we're going to dive division by division and just kind of look at what some fantasy needs may be and some free agency needs and how those needs may impact fantasy relevancy for next year. Brant, do you have anything you want to say before we jump right into this?
No, just, over the next couple of weeks, like you said, we're going to really hit on our free agency. We're going to fade the rookies just a little bit. And then as soon as free agency opens up, we're going to get back into our rookies. We're going to get some mock drafts in. If anybody's interested in doing mock drafts with us, reach out to us on the Fantasyholic Messenger. Reach out to us on the Fatboyz Dynasty Facebook page. Reach out to us, and if we have one, we'll definitely get a hold of you and get you guys involved. We want to do some live mock drafts before and after the rookies, actually the rookie draft is. So definitely get out and reach out to us, and we'll definitely love to have some interaction with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely, Brant. And anybody who does anything like what we do with podcasts knows that it's the engagement of all you listeners that make the wheels spin. So, we got some feedback last week on some things that we already knew we needed to fix, and here we are hopefully fixing them. So, definitely interested in again, having you guys join us in mock drafts and, things like that. We even talked about doing an actual league potentially with some of you guys, that joined us pretty regularly during the season on Sunday morning start sits last week and things like that too. So if that's something you're interested in, off season's a time when things like that get built. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. So without further ado, let's jump into these free agents, Brant. And let's start at the quarterback position. And I kind of want to talk about the one that I think is the most intriguing big name, in my opinion. That's guaranteed to be out there not playing for the team he played for last year, and that's Derek Carr. The Raiders were trying to work through some kind of a trade, and it sounded like they had something in place with the New Orleans Saints for him to be dealt there, and then he came out, what was it, yesterday morning or the day before, and said that he's absolutely not going to waive his no trade rights to go to the Saints. And a lot of this probably has to do with, if I was Derek Carr, I wouldn't want to stay in the AFC West and be overshadowed by a two-time MVP, two-time Super Bowl champ, Patrick Mahomes. Again, congratulations to the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. We skirted right around that this morning talking about these free agents. But, so Derek Carr, I think he's 100% gone from that conference at least, or that division at least. I think the likely landing spot for Derek Carr, at least for me, I think it really just goes out and it kind of falls into what they've done year after year. And I know they're in a spot where they could draft one this year, but it would not shock me at all to see Derek Carr end up in Indianapolis with the Colts. They've tried this, one man's trash is another man's treasure method with quarterbacks for the last several years, basically since Andrew Luck's been there. But with Derek Carr, he's still relatively young. I mean, he's not Phillip Rivers, Matt Ryan old. He could go there and be successful for 3 or 4 years. And, with as good as their defense is, their offensive line's been good in the past. They've got a pretty good receiving core, very solid run game. It wouldn't shock me at all to see them be, one quarterback away from being a perennial playoff team. So again, I know they have that top number 4 pick in the draft. But if they're not just blown away by, CJ Stroud or Will Levis, because I believe in my heart of hearts that Bryce Young is going prior to their pick unless they trade up. I could see Derek Carr being the answer for them. However, where I want to see Derek Carr go, Brant, I want to see Derek Carr go to Tennessee if they end up letting Ryan Tannehill leave. I would think Derek Carr would be amazing for Treylon Burks, Robert Woods, that young tight end there that I said I was going to learn his name by the end of the offseason, but it's not the end of the offseason yet, so I got time. But I think Derek Carr would be a huge upgrade in Tennessee. I think, obviously Derrick Henry is getting up there in age. And there's only a few years left on the windows of him being a productive back, and I think they have to take advantage of that if they're going to win anything meaningful while Derrick Henry's in town. A guy like Derek Carr could come in and really give them that boost.
Yeah, with Derek Carr, I think Indy's probably one of the best landing spots for him too. Like you said, they're already built to win. They have good young receiving core. They got a great offensive line. They got an amazing running back. They got a top tier defense that was banged up a lot this year, but I think Indy is a great spot for him. He could feed off of Jonathan Taylor, and that rolls right into, like you said, with Tennessee. They're built also, young enough, but they're still built enough to compete for most in most games. Even with Ryan Tannehill, Malik Willis there, they were competing in almost every game. So yeah, those are two of the best spots. Another one that I think that's very possible is the New Orleans Saints. Is he goes down to New Orleans. They've already met with him twice. Maybe they've already have something, kind of not written in stone, but kind of jotted on a leaf in case they got to tear it up for tampering reasons for him. Contract wise, because I know they're in cap hell right now, waiting to get rid of possibly Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara and all them for cap cuts. But those are the three places that I expect to see. One of those places where I expect to see Derek Carr at. And all three of those teams are really built to win. So yeah, I expect Derek Carr to be on the move, and I expect him to honestly be on the move very, very quickly. Because I think it's got to be February 15th he has to be cut by, or they're going to have to pay him. The only other thing I could see is Vegas just going, well, I guess we're just going to hold on to you and make you disgruntled all next year since you wanted to do that to us. But I don't think they're going to want all that cap salary because I think it's a pretty good chunk of it. So I expect him to be out the door. And like you said, like you and I said, I think it's Indy, Tennessee, or New Orleans are the three best teams for him.
Yeah, the New Orleans one would be very intriguing to see what they would have to do to get something done. That's why I think the trade spot made sense, because they would have had to move some of those higher pieced assets back to Vegas potentially in order to get under the salary cap. I'm not sure how they make it work with their salary cap, but that's something you and I will talk about over the course of the next several weeks when we start diving into that. But it would be a great landing spot for him with Chris Olave and all those names that are there. So definitely agree with the New Orleans as well on him.
Okay. Let's talk about another big name that's already out there and has been talked about being tagged and everything else. And that's Lamar Jackson. With Lamar Jackson, I expect him to be tagged. And I don't see a trade being made from Baltimore. I don't see anyone wanting to pay the price for Lamar Jackson. I know they want a lot for him. They want multiple first-round picks, and I don't see a whole lot of teams wanting to pay that price, especially when you had a guy that missed the last 6-7 games of it in crunch time with his team. Even in the playoffs, I think he missed that game there. And do you want that on your team? I don't know. And he wants all that guaranteed money, so I don't know if any team wants to really pay for that. So that's going to be a tough one there with Lamar. Atlanta is a team that I could see going after him, but once again, I don't think they want to pay that. Bo had to step away for a minute to try to keep the noise down for us. But yeah, as for Lamar Jackson, I expect him to stay in Baltimore. It'll be a disgruntled season. Another run first team. Does he play? Does he sit out? I'm not sure about that. Atlanta is really the only one that I could see being in competition for him. Bo, I was just telling them all, I think Atlanta might be the only place that may be in competition, but I don't see you guys spending that guaranteed money on him. And for your sake and my sake, I really hope not, because that in my mind brings down Drake London and Kyle Pitts, just because I'm not thrilled with his passing. Well, Kyle Pitts may become an automatic, top one tight end here because he does love to throw to the tight end. But yeah, I think Lamar just has a disgruntled year there in Baltimore.
So here's the problem is that, I like you alluded to, Brant, if you're a team wanting to acquire Lamar Jackson, you're going to have to give up multiple first-round draft picks or multiple draft picks and young players that Baltimore likes, all to just have to pay Lamar Jackson to be the highest paid quarterback in NFL history. He wants more guaranteed money than Deshaun Watson. Does Lamar Jackson deserve that? Probably. He doesn't have the legal issues. He has been playing football. He hasn't had time off. Whatever. I just don't see a team, especially not Atlanta, especially not when you have the owner coming out, giving kudos to Desmond Ridder. I don't see Atlanta going out and doing that, especially after how sloppy it was in their pursuit of Deshaun Watson last year, how that kind of tattered relationships with Matt Ryan, who's a franchise great for Atlanta. I just think that they probably learned their lesson with that last year. I think they'll, sit out on that this year. So, but with Lamar Jackson, I'm on 100% agreement with you, Brant, and I think he ends up back in Baltimore. However, I think they end up getting somewhat similar of a deal done to make him the highest paid quarterback out there. It sounds like there's rumors they're $100 million apart, whatever. It only takes one good offer to get that fixed, and it sounds like they're still having that dialogue there. But what I kind of wrote down with Lamar Jackson when you talk about him is, no matter where Lamar Jackson goes for fantasy, it's going to be great for him. You and I are kind of been, avid anti-Lamar Jackson quarterback haters, I guess is the best word for it, since he really came into the league and since you and I started doing podcasts, 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. So, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I'm not changing my tune on Lamar. I was thinking about it this morning when we were talking about what we were doing with this, and it's like, what would Lamar's numbers look like if you took him and moved him to Las Vegas, where they're going to be needing a quarterback next year? Well, I think obviously Lamar Jackson as a whole would be better than what he's been in Baltimore. He'd have much better weapons across the board with Hunter Renfrow, Devontae Adams, and Darren Waller, who's really not that much of a downgrade from Mark Andrews. It is a downgrade, but not much. But the problem is, I think all three of those guys would take massive hits in their fantasy production, just because Derek Carr is a much more prolific passer than Lamar. So again, with Lamar, I think wherever he goes, if you own him in a super flex or a regular dynasty one quarterbacks, you're not going to be upset wherever he ends up. You're just not, because the wide receiving core, and Brant, no offense to you, I know you're obsessed with Rashad Bateman, but their wide receiver core can't be any worse than what it is in Baltimore, wherever he were to end up. But with that being said, anywhere he goes, you may be upset if you're one of the guys that owns one of the wide receivers that he on his new team. Like you mentioned, if he did come to Atlanta, I own Kyle Pitts in a few dynasty leagues, and I own Drake London in every dynasty league on accident. I do not, I like to spread the wealth. I don't want to own all of one player. But with that being said, I don't think I'd be really enthused with, Drake London's value moving forward if that were the case.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm gonna hit two quarterbacks here and kind of one setting, and that's Geno Smith. I expect him to stay in Seattle as a mentor to a young quarterback, but, and this is my but, I don't know if it's the answer Seattle keeps saying he might be. I think the answer is in free agency, and I think that answer is Jimmy Garoppolo. I would love to see Jimmy G come into Seattle and push Geno either to a higher limit or even take over that starting job. Geno has been great with great running backs. I think Geno could really open up the Seattle pass attack, and I think he could really do big things with Jimmy could really do big things there in Seattle. So I really think Jimmy G going to Seattle is my ideal spot. I would like to see him push Geno. So that's going to be something interesting. I know that Seattle was in talks kind of with San Fran because trading in conference is kind of stupid, especially when it comes down to a quarterback. But yeah, I would like to see Jimmy G either in Seattle or Indianapolis would be two great places for him. But as for Geno, I think Geno's going to re-sign in Seattle. I think he's going to stay there as a mentor. I think Seattle's going to use – they have, I think it was 5 top 75 picks. I expect one of those to be a quarterback, and I don't expect Seattle to actually go out and sign a quarterback outside of Geno. But if they do, I'm hoping it's Jimmy G because I just think he fits there so much.
Yeah, especially Jimmy G, but not so much necessarily Geno. I think Geno's going back to Seattle. It sounds like he's on record saying he wants it to happen. Seattle's on record saying they want it to happen. We'll see if the financial numbers work out for that to be a pair moving forward. But Jimmy G, I think Jimmy G is really like the last name outside of the top two quarterback series, like the number 3 guy in my opinion. When you talk about Derek Carr and Lamar Jackson, now if Aaron Rodgers happens to be on the market, whether it be through a free agency or trade, obviously he'd leapfrog. But Jimmy G is the type of guy who he walks into a quarterback needy team that's got all the other pieces put around them, and they're a title contender. Had he have not gotten hurt and the Brock Purdy saga continued, I think it would have been a slam dunk for Jimmy G to get re-signed on a long-term deal in San Fran. But, you write it off at this point. San Fran's not going to pay all what they did for Trey Lance and then have Brock Purdy as a backup and not let those two go into camp as the contenders for that job. So I do think Jimmy G goes elsewhere, and I think he's going to be one of the last dominoes to fall before you start seeing guys like who I have written down, Baker Mayfield, start getting a chance. So when you talk about a guy like Baker, who has been like an emotional roller coaster in his career, there's been extreme highs and extreme lows. Where other quarterbacks or other wide receivers' dads are coming out talking about the reason their son's production's bad is because of Baker. So it'll be interesting to see. Baker looked, or let me rephrase that. Baker had his moments in Los Angeles with Sean McVay when that Rams team was really reeling and struggling all season. I'd almost say that, granted there was an injury there, but Baker probably looked a little better in his time in Los Angeles than Matthew Stafford did last year. Again, and that was with no Allen Robinson and with no Cooper Kupp for Baker either. But if Baker's, I think, is going to be the quarterback that if he signs early, he's going someplace as a backup. I mean, it is what it is. He's not done enough. But if Baker sticks around and waits out, and you see this quarterback carousel move around, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, our team's good, but now there's no quarterbacks left for us, and we're not in a spot to draft one. Insert Baker Mayfield as a stopgap guy. And I wrote down the spot that I think Baker would be great at and that I'd love to see him play. And a lot of people may disagree with this take, you included, Brand, but I would love to see Baker in Las Vegas. Devontae Adams, Darren Waller, Hunter Renfrow, those guys we mentioned earlier, a pretty good run game already in place. You put Baker in an established place like that where, let's be honest, Josh McDaniel may not be a great head coach. And, we're at least going to see him start the season next year as the Raiders head coach, but he is a quarterback guru and could be the perfect guy to fix Baker Mayfield, if you will. So Baker Mayfield, I would love to see in Las Vegas.
Yeah, Vegas, I think it's a good spot for him. I expect Baker to go somewhere to compete for a starting job. I wouldn't be surprised to see him stay in Los Angeles to compete with Matthew Stafford as he comes back and have a nice little 1-2 punch there with those two. Vegas makes a lot of sense. Prior to Seattle getting so close to Geno, I would have said Seattle would have been in contention for him. Baker's a guy that I may see that I kind of see going to either Miami with the Tua issues, who's still not technically cleared from concussions and so many concussions last year, and be a backup for Tua because he steps into an amazing offense with Tyreek and I know Gesicki's a free agent, but that's a guy that I see staying there in Miami. But with Tyreek and Waddle and whatever running back they add, because I feel like they're going to, I feel like that's a great established offense for Baker to back up Tua. But I think Baker ends up in Houston. They need a quarterback. They have Davis Mills there as he's done, been serviceable. I don't know if Houston actually spends, their number 2 pick on a quarterback this year. I know it would be the smart thing to do. And even if they do, I still think Baker may be there to try to push that rookie just a little bit more. I like Baker in Houston, either A, to be the starter to start the season or to push that rookie a little bit more into being that franchise quarterback. So yeah, I kind of see Baker as either Miami or Houston as two of the best landing spots for him and where I honestly believe he's going to end up.
Yeah, another one, Brant, that I didn't even think about until after you started talking about Tua is Arizona. With Kyler, they're saying Kyler probably won't be back to start the season, so they may need a guy to start that season off there in Arizona. And hey, insert a guy like Baker Mayfield who, hey, listen, dude, you're going to be the guy until Kyler Murray's back healthy, whatever. Maybe Baker comes in there and looks good. Then they have a valuable trade chip, or maybe they don't want to turn it back over to Kyler. Maybe the new head coach that comes in doesn't want Kyler as their guy. Who knows? So it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out there. But that's another good landing spot. Let's jump on into these running backs, Brant.
Hang on, I got one more quarterback I wanted to bring up, and that's Danny Dimes. Daniel Jones is technically a free agent. This guy I'm going to talk about real short. I think he re-signs with New York. He took them to the playoffs this year. I think he's on a 1-year prove-it deal. I just wanted to make sure we got his name out there. That keep an eye out for him, because if New York does let him go, this is a guy that could end up in Indy or in Tennessee, or even in Vegas as, a 1 or 2 year option. And really, I think he can help out those teams a lot. We saw him improve so much under that new coaching staff in New York. So I expect him to actually stay there, because I don't think New York's going to be high enough to get a quarterback. But Daniel Jones is another guy that is out there.
Yeah, Brian Dable is not letting Daniel Jones go anywhere. Danny Dimes will be in a New York Giants uniform next year. I think he did way too well down the stretch for them to let him scoot. So definitely look forward to seeing him back there and continuing to build on what he did with Brian Dable this year. All right, so now we move into the running backs.
Yes.
So let's just start off with the big one, that Daniel Jones's teammate there, Saquon Barkley. This guy is another one. You talk about Baker, where you talk about highs and lows of a career. This guy, at least in the last 10 years, the most highly touted running back in a dynasty draft, especially rookie draft, that you could come after. Maybe, even more so than, Bijan Robinson is this year in this year's draft class. But Saquon Barkley came into the league, set the league on fire his rookie year with Eli Manning, then kind of tapered off, had some injury issues, and then was able to stay healthy again this year, and was back to where he belonged as an RB1. I think this guy's the type of guy who's going to get pretty good money for a veteran running back coming off of his rookie deal. I think it's most likely that he stays in New York. I think Brian Dable is going to want to run it back, see if they can add some pieces around some of those core guys on offense, and see where they end up next year. But if I could pick a landing spot for Saquon, and if Saquon could pick a landing spot for him, Chicago would be the spot. There was that interview where they talked about, where would you like to go, whatever. And Chicago got mentioned because he loved Walter Payton, and he'd pick a number in the 30s, and all this, that, and the other. But I just think a two-headed monster of Saquon Barkley and Justin Fields with an RPO option would just be electric to watch. It'd give those Chicago Bears fans something to be excited about when they finish 3-14 next year. So Saquon to the Chicago would be a lot of fun for both fantasy and viewing pleasures.
Buffalo is where I want to see him go. I want to see him be a Bill. I want to see him get that backfield takeover. I don't believe he will be in Buffalo. I think that price tag is going to be too high. Fantasy-wise, I would love to see him there. But I expect, like you said, him to stay in New York also. But Buffalo is my ideal where I would love to see him. But yeah, like you said, I think he stays in New York. Let's bring up another guy that I think is a highly touted especially after his year this year. It's a guy that you've loved for the last few years. That's Josh Jacobs. I think he's out of Vegas. I don't think they re-sign him. I think they like Zamir White and what they have there with that, and I think they're going to have to focus on really replacing that quarterback. So in my mind is, if Barkley leaves, I think Jacobs is a guy that could go fill that role in New York. The other two spots that I absolutely love him is Buffalo and Chicago, which is kind of funny. Those, the two where we said Barkley. Well, Jacobs fits the same type of scheme there. The RPO, he can catch the ball out of the backfield. He has no problem toting the ball 20 times a game. So yeah, I would love to see Jacobs there in Buffalo or Chicago. And like I said, if Barkley's out, I think New York's another spot for him.
Yeah, Jacobs is an intriguing one to me because he's been pretty good his entire time in the league. And he's still relatively young. I think going into his second year in the league, he was like 3 months younger than Clyde Edwards-Helaire was when Clyde Edwards-Helaire skyrocketed up people's boards when the Kansas City Chiefs took him at the tail end of the NFL draft that year. So with Josh Jacobs still being young, still being as good as he was last year, I wouldn't be shocked to see Vegas come out and like potentially franchise tag him and keep him in Vegas for an additional year, especially if they have some kind of a plan in place to get an Aaron Rodgers or somebody like that in town. You're not going to want to turn the reins over to Zamir White with Aaron Rodgers. If you're going all in on a guy like that, you're going to bring Josh Jacobs back. But if they happen to let him go, Josh Jacobs is the type of guy that I would absolutely love to see go to a Miami or a Houston. I know, everybody is especially with what Dameon Pierce did, but what about Dameon Pierce last year? He was fantastic. He was. I was late to get on board with that. You're right. But as good as Dameon Pierce was last year, he's not as talented as Josh Jacobs. And Josh Jacobs would be much better in Houston than Dameon Pierce. So if Josh Jacobs does get out, personally, I'd love to see him in Houston or Miami, Brant.
Yeah, Jacobs is only 25 years old. As you were talking about his age, I did go pull that up real fast. Yeah, he's only 25 years old as of today. So yeah, he's gonna get a nice size contract somewhere, and I think Houston may be the best place to give him the money and the extension that he deserves.
Absolutely.
So let's go into a guy that I like to see in Houston, and I know he's on your board as well. And I think he's one guy that you and me have loved to watch play whenever he gets a chance. That's Alexander Madison. We talked about it pre-show, and the fact that Cook may be a camp cut or later, so they may try to keep Alexander Madison on a cheaper deal. So Madison could end up staying in Minnesota. My three best landing spots for him, and it's just the way he plays, is Houston, Kansas City, or Miami. I just think he fits those systems the best. He's an outside runner. He's a good guy to grind. He can catch the ball very, very well. So he's a guy that he goes into Houston, he pushes Pierce to either be better or he passes Pierce. He goes into Miami and he's almost the instant one because Mostert and Jeff Wilson are both free agents. And so, yeah, they both have to step away from that team, and I expect them to go after a running back, and I'd like to see Madison there.
Yeah, so you talk about Alexander Madison, and you brought up the good point already that we talked about backstage. I think Alexander Madison probably ends up staying in Minnesota potentially. If Dalvin Cook ends up being a camp cut or whatever the case may be there, they may just end up talking him into staying and saying you'll get more of a bigger role. Maybe it'll look something like Zeke and Tony Pollard next year. But if I had to pick a landing spot for Alexander Madison, my goodness, I'm not sure I could draw up anything better for Alexander Madison than the Cincinnati Bengals. There's the litigations concerns with Joe Mixon, Samaje Perine up there in age. If Alexander Madison could end up in a spot like Cincinnati, where again they're not going to turn it over to what is it, Chris Evans there. They're going to want somebody who's predominant. And listen, I'm not sure you could go out and pick a better replacement for a guy like Joe Mixon if they end up cutting him than a guy like Alexander Madison, who again is still young, who is still showing that he could be elite. When Dalvin Cook has missed time, I think you put a guy like Alexander Madison in Cincinnati, and they don't miss a beat moving forward.
Yeah, since he could be a good spot. That's all pending on Mixon's go around there. So the last one I have on my list. Sorry, I had to step away and take that phone call real fast. I wasn't expecting that till later. The next one on my list is David Montgomery. I think that Chicago was good to him, but I think they're ready to turn the reins over to Khalil Herbert or add another veteran back. And Monty, in my mind, I think he goes down to Atlanta. I like him there. He's a ground and pound type guy, the guy that, Derrick Henry was when he was in Tennessee. Now, I'm not saying he's as good as Derrick Henry, not by any means, but he's a guy that can get the job done down there in Atlanta. We saw Algier handle it last year. I know Atlanta might be in and out with, is Algier the guy? Is he not? I know you guys are young. Monty's a guy that I could see going into there. Wherever Monty goes, I really think he pushes to be a starter. So Miami, Atlanta, somewhere that doesn't have a solidified number one running back is where I expect Monty to end up. And I think it'd be a good fit for him in most places.
Yeah, Tyler Algier, I would have said for several weeks that wouldn't shock me to see Atlanta replace him. But what he ended up doing at the end of the season, he was right there with Kenneth Walker with rushing numbers, his yards per carry, all the things. And Atlanta had one of the most successful rushing attacks in the National Football League last year. I, I think with Atlanta having so many pressing areas of concern on defense, they do have the second most cap space in football, so that does change some things too. But I'm not sure you see them spending on a running back when they're still going to have Cordero Patterson on the roster. They're still going to have Caleb Huntley on the roster, a guy that Atlanta was extremely infatuated with until he went down to injury. Avery Williams will still be on the roster, and Tyler Algier. So I'm not sure that you see them go out and add another back. However, if it was a guy as high profiled as David Montgomery, you would expect they're signing him to be the starter. So it would make a fair amount of sense. But with David Montgomery, for me, I really think what David Montgomery is going to be is he's going to be one of those domino guys. So as the pieces start falling of the puzzle, and guys like Saquon and Josh Jacobs start signing their contracts and going places, you could see him potentially pivoting and falling into one of those spots where those guys aren't going. I could see him at a spot I could see that makes a lot of sense, honestly. But again, it's a new coaching regime. It could change things. Would be Arizona. He could do a lot of things very similarly to James Conner, just a little bit slightly younger and probably a little cheaper than what they had Conner at in Arizona. But as far as David Montgomery goes, he's very similar to kind of what I said with Jimmy G in the quarterback realm. He's just outside of that top piece. And a lot of these running backs, I think, are going to be dependent on the NFL draft because they are, pretty good running backs coming out this year, and Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson and Sean Tucker and, Zach Charbonnet. So a guy like David Montgomery, we may wait on several weeks before we know where he's going. So it'll just be one to pay attention to, especially if you're a DMont owner in dynasty leagues. So just one to be patient with. Since you got your last one out, let's go ahead and move into the wide receiver position. And what I want to say about this before we really dive into it too deep, Brant, is there's really not any difference makers in this pool this year. There's really just not a whole lot of star power in these free agent moves or these free agent wide receivers. I don't expect any of these guys to go in and make a huge difference in the teams. I don't expect them to go in and take a bunch of targets away from number ones. These guys are all just a bunch of number twos. They may make your fantasy quarterback a little bit more viable, and maybe you own these guys and they go to a situation where they're a little bit more viable. But let's get it started right off the bat. I want to talk about the best one, in my opinion, which is Juju Smith-Schuster, Super Bowl champ with the Kansas City Chiefs last year. I think his most likely spot, Brant, is that he ends up right back in Kansas City. One, you win a Super Bowl with a team and you play with a guy like Patrick Mahomes, you get a taste for something like that. You want to do it again. And largely in part because Juju didn't do anything this year to go out and get paid by anybody else. So if he's going to get a small money deal from Kansas City and a small money deal from a team like Houston, which one are you going to pick? The one where you're going to be successful or the one where you're not? So I think he does come back to Kansas City and tries to carve out a better role for himself moving forward, and then maybe get the bag because he is still pretty young. But if I could pick a spot for Juju to go to that's not Kansas City, Buffalo's the spot for me, man. I mean, Buffalo, they've tried out this gambit of wide receivers to fill out that number two opposite of Stephon Diggs and Isaiah McKenzie, Gabe Davis, Cole Beasley, all these different names. And they've all had their moment in the sun, but none of them have really clinged on and claimed that role as their own, if you will. So I could see a guy like Juju coming in, stepping in, being that number two opposite of Stephon Diggs, kind of similarly to the way he was with Antonio Brown when they were both still in Pittsburgh together.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat with you there with Juju. There's not a whole lot that he's done this year to go out and get the bag. As for the wide receivers in this free agency, this is why all the wide receivers went out and got their bag last year, because that's where the big class was. Juju, I think he stays in Kansas City. I think he's really enjoying himself there. He's really enjoying himself with Patrick Mahomes. He has probably the best quarterback he's ever played with there, and could possibly be the best quarterback he ever will play with. Because I don't expect anybody anytime soon coming out to take that over. So, yeah, I think Juju stays right there in Kansas City. Buffalo would be a great landing spot as a number two. That's really probably the best other spot for him. Anywhere else, he's going to be a number one. maybe he can go to the Raiders, but I don't see that being a very good spot for him. So yeah, I think Kansas City makes the most sense. One of my favorite guys out of these wide receivers is a guy that I've been infatuated with for the last couple of years, and that's Jacoby Myers. He's out the door in New England. I don't expect New England to re-sign him. I mean, they haven't invested a whole lot in him. They've invested in trying to find a wide receiver outside of him. But I expect Jacoby Myers to go somewhere and compete for that number 2 role and possibly compete for the number 1 role, as he has shown flashes of being able to be a number 1 target. Houston is by far my favorite landing spot for him. I think that, it'd be good to have that young wide receiver, a guy that's been in the league a few years, help mentor the younger wide receivers there. I expect Brandon Cooks to be out the door probably in a trade or a cut. So that wide receiver 1's wide open. I know Nico Collins has done enough to really, solidify himself to stay on the field, but I don't know if he's the number 1 in the NFL. But yeah, Jacoby Myers is a guy that I definitely could see going to Houston or even going to Buffalo to compete for that number 2 role and try out another, be a slew of the wide receiver carousel they've had going on there as their number 2. I expect Jacoby to go in and make an impact somewhere. And he's a great target for most quarterbacks. He's a great safety blanket. He started to find the end zone last year, which was great to see because I know he did go almost a year and a half without finding the end zone. But Jacoby's a guy that I really like moving on this year. And like I said, I think Houston's the best spot for him.
Yeah, I know with you, you've held on to Jacoby his entire time in the league in our dynasty, our homegrown league here. But Jacoby goes to someplace like you brought up Buffalo, and that just makes a ton of sense. Not only does he get to compete with a huge quarterback upgrade in Josh Allen, but he also gets to go play and rub Bill Belichick's nose and what he's able to do twice a year if he stays in division and goes someplace like Buffalo. But Houston's another one that makes a ton of sense for a guy like Jacoby. I've got 2 other wide receivers written down here, Brant, and I'm just going to hit them both at the same time because honestly, their landing spots where I think these guys end up makes a ton of sense for Jacoby too. So I'm going to throw them all in there in one lump. That's DJ Chark and Alan Lazard. I don't expect either of these guys to stay where they're at in the NFC North in the Lions or the Packers, respectively. I think that the 2 most prestigious landing spots that these guys could go to is the Chargers or the Dallas Cowboys. The Chargers, there's some talk about Keenan Allen being cut there, which is mind-boggling. But if you add a guy like DJ Chark or Alan Lazard to either Dallas or Los Angeles, they're going to walk in the door immediately competing for that number 2 spot. And let's be honest, I even as big of a Michael Gallup fan as I have been in Dallas, he's not done nearly enough to be the number 2. I mean, especially not when T.Y. Hilton signs off the street and is a bigger role down the stretch than Michael Gallup is. So I think you see a guy like Alan Lazard in Dallas, takes a lot of pressure off CeeDee Lamb, gives Dak another big body target to throw to. It just makes a ton of sense. And I think that's the problem with this wide receiver class, the free agent wide receiver class for me, Brant, is that there's only so many good landing spots where guys of this caliber can go in and make a fantasy relevant difference. And for me, really, it's Los Angeles, it's Dallas, and potentially Houston, where these guys could step in and be like, yep, okay, that guy has some fantasy relevancy. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I even lump Jacoby Myers into that because Jacoby is talented. But if he doesn't go to a spot where he's going to have an opportunity to put that talent on display, it really doesn't do any good.
Yeah, Lazard to Dallas makes the most sense to me. DJ Chark to New England makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know how I really feel about that fantasy-wise, but this is a guy that was a number 1 wide receiver down at Jacksonville. So he's been around the league for a little bit, and we know Belichick likes to, take some of the older guys and see what he can do with them. So DJ Chark to New England could be a decent little fit there. But yeah, these 3 guys are all pending. I could see Jacoby going to, or Jacoby or any of these guys going to fill Lazard's role there in Green Bay as well. Especially if Rodgers stays, a lot of these guys would like the opportunity to play with an Aaron Rodgers. But yeah, it makes too much sense for them to go into a team that needs a number 2 wide receiver. So Houston needs a 1 or a 2, or Dallas, like you said, or Buffalo. These 3 guys all make sense to go to one of those 3 teams.
Absolutely. Did you have any other wide receivers you wanted to bring up here?
I do not. Like you said, the class is not very pretty this year.
Yeah, it's really not. And so kind of like we had alluded to earlier, and I don't want to spend a whole lot more time on it here, but next week we're going to grab a couple divisions and we're going to start going through them team by team on what they kind of need, and how that the fantasy world may be shaped based on those free agency needs. So definitely stay looking forward to that, and we'll see you guys with that next week. And again, if you want to get in on a mock draft with us, you want to draft with the Fatboyz, don't hesitate to throw a message to the Fantasyholics podcast page, or Fantasyholics Facebook page, sorry, or the Fatboyz Dynasty podcast page. Those both can be found on Facebook. So if that's something you're interested in, don't hesitate to reach out on that. So, Bran, I think that does it for me. You got anything else?
Nope, I got nothing else added. So as always, stay hungry
and stay fat, my friends.